In the summer of 2022, the Dutch streets presented a desolate landscape. Hundreds of immigrants were sleeping outdoors as the refugee centers completely collapsed. Humanitarian organizations such as Doctors Without Borders deployed within the country for the first time in their history. The volunteers walked among the evicted, offering food and some treatment to alleviate the discomfort of homelessness. Some immigrants, driven by desperation, resorted to robbery and intimidation. Crime rates skyrocketed, and the local middle class succumbed to fury and frustration. The country was on the brink of collapse. All indicators suggested that the Netherlands would spiral into crisis. However, this did not happen. The Dutch people supported the proposal of politicians such as Geert and Schoof, who created a new social pact and implemented extreme immigration policies.
Close the Dutch borders for immigrants from Islamic countries immediately.
But who managed to go through what was known as the perfect storm of the crisis and prevented the Netherlands from falling into an absolute catastrophe. What was the perfect immigration storm? As was the case in most of Europe, since 2015, the Netherlands has experienced a growing influx of migrants. In 2022, the total migration figure for the year stood at 400,000, the highest recorded in recent history. The unexpected influx of refugees tested accommodation capacity in the Netherlands at a time when the continent has been struggling with an economic crisis that affected the quality of life of native residents, aggravated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Western sanctions on Moscow. One of the most striking differences of what happened in the Netherlands compared to other nations affected by this phenomenon is that it receives a huge number of migrants from other European countries. This means that many of the people who enter the Netherlands do so in search of work or a better quality of life than what they can find in their own countries. Surprisingly, this had a very negative impact on the Dutch middle class, who saw a loss of jobs to foreigners, as well as an increase in the cost of living, especially in services such as education and health. This impacted both the unskilled labor market and the professional sector, since 40% of the enrolled university students were foreigners. Do you think it's fair for locals to bear the brunt of economic challenges due to immigration? What solutions would you propose? In the case of refugees who arrived from countries such as Syria or Morocco, the situation was less than in other countries, but due to the unexpected increase between 2021 and 2022, it hit the government of Premier Mark Rutte squarely. The Netherlands lacked the infrastructure to contain the wave of those seeking asylum, and, as we have mentioned, large contingents of the evicted had to set up camp near the asylums or, directly, sleep outdoors while waiting for a bed to become available. For the first time in history, Dutch humanitarian organizations that typically provided aid in third world countries had to act in their own cities. Like a dystopian vision, Doctors Without Borders and the Red Cross, among others, patrolled the streets of Dutch cities as if it were in a war zone. Crime rates, which had been in sharp decline since 2012, rose again and shot up by almost 10%, causing the Netherlands to drop 10 points in the International Security Index. The government's response. All of this unfolded within 2 years, making immigration the main debate in Dutch domestic politics and creating what was called the perfect storm. If Mark Rutte's government did not act, the country could fall into a vacuum. The problem was that, precisely, the government coalition that was in charge of the Netherlands between 2012 and 2022, with Rutte at the head, had no idea how to confront the immigration crisis. Completely overwhelmed by the circumstances and witnessing that the Dutch people were entering a process of frustration and despair, Rutte preferred to throw in the towel and resign.
Rutte has announced his resignation after his governing coalition fell apart.
Abandoning politics forever and leaving the problem in the hands of others.
To make sure that there will be less influx of asylum seekers in the Netherlands. And
here comes a key player. Geert, a far-right parliamentarian who entered parliament in 2006 but has gained much more popularity in recent years due to his proposed tough line against immigration. With a country on fire and a people deeply enraged,
around 2,000 people surrounded the venue where the town council was discussing the matter.
Wilders' far-right party became the protagonist in the parliamentary elections, and after the resignation of Mark Rutte, Wilders imposed its own candidate, Schoof, who had been Ministry of Justice since 2020 as the new Prime Minister of the Netherlands. Schoof had extensive experience both in security and intelligence, which is why he invested Wilders' proposals with an institutional aura and assured that crime and immigration would be an absolute focus of the new government coalition. Together, they decided to implement contingency plans to calm the Dutch and restore peace. The new measures. One of the key aspects of Wilders' policies was to focus on immigrants from Africa and the Middle East, such as Morocco, Syria, or Yemen. Although the politician was called xenophobic, he defended himself by arguing that refugees from these countries represent the majority of crime statistics among migrants. Do you think these measures are effective, or do they risk alienating certain groups? What would be a balanced approach? Despite the fact that representatives of other European nations condemned his statements and, even more so, his policies, the Dutch put their vote of confidence in his party. Wilders and Schoof decided to speak to the common citizen, whom they described as Joe the Plumber, and criticized the immigration situation that directly impacted the heart of society. For example, they noted that both refugees and asylum seekers could get state-subsidized rent, while natives, if they found a home, had to spend a large part of their salary on rent, not to talk about mortgages or buying a house, which has become very difficult in the last decade. Wilders' party proposed setting a hard limit of 50,000 immigrants a year, including refugees, asylum seekers, migrant workers, and students. At the same time, he proposed introducing an asylum system that differentiates between those fleeing persecution and those fleeing war. This latter group would have fewer rights, including the right to family reunification. However, this was just the beginning. In 2024, they presented a policy proposal comprising 10 key chapters, including a series of strict reforms on asylum and integration requirements, as well as the implementation of a temporary asylum crisis law to allow for measures wide-ranging on migration. The key points of the coalition agreement are the following. The indefinite asylum permit will be abolished, and the requirements for temporary residence permit will be tightened. Asylum seekers whose applications have been rejected should be deported as often as possible, including through forced measures. People with refugee status will no longer have priority in the allocation of social rental housing. Automatic family reunification will no longer be possible. The asylum seeker dispersal law, which was intended to distribute asylum seekers and refugees more equitably throughout the country, will be repealed, preventing certain municipalities or regions from disproportionately hosting asylum seekers. Additional integration obligations include extension of the standard naturalization period to 10 years, regardless of the type of residence permit. Foreigners who wish to obtain Dutch nationality must, if possible, renounce their nationality of origin. The language requirement for naturalization is raised to level B1. Integration includes knowledge about the Holocaust and its victims. The results. As harsh as some of these proposals may seem, the truth is that they are working, and the vast majority of Dutch people support Schoof and Wilders in their policies. Despite criticism from the progressive sectors of the EU, the Netherlands decided to lower the hammer on the immigration crisis, and, unlike many of the countries that still suffer from it, with enormous social and political costs, they have contained the disaster. Do you think the ends justify the means in this case? Are the results worth the potential social and political costs? Immigration rates have begun to plummet. In 2023, they fell by 17% compared to the previous year, and by 2024, this number is expected to drop even more, which is shocking considering that this is happening against the grain of the rest of Europe, where the flow of immigrants seems to have no boundaries. At the moment, crime rates are also going down. Although the Netherlands has not yet regained its previous standing in the International Crime Index, it recovered 5 of the 10 points it had lost in 2022. All in all, the Wilders government must still face several challenges, since the regional economy is still not at its best, and Holland remains one of the places with the highest cost of living in the world. However, it is an example of how to manage a crisis that is sinking much richer countries with greater infrastructure, which is why it is important not to lose sight of the actions that Holland took to resolve the immigration crisis. Do you think that the measures that the current Dutch government is implementing can be maintained in the long term? Or is it a house of cards that can collapse at any moment?